Welcome tonight to Environmental Justice Part 4 of the program that we are sponsoring from First Church in Belmont. And we are really pleased that we have such a good turnout. Right now we have 16 people on our screens and more are coming. So we're delighted to have everyone join us for this very important program. And I just want to give you a few comments. You know to mute your screens while the presenters are talking. And then after that, what we're going to do is have a fairly active and engaged discussion during the presentation. Both of our presenters tonight, David Deese, whom you know, and Angelo Gurgel will take questions anytime. So we can, if they're doing part of their presentation where they're showing slides, you might want to mute yourself. Other than that, as long as you don't have background noise, it's fine to unmute yourself. So I want to welcome you by way of introduction to David Deese. And you all know who Dave is. He's a member of First Church in Belmont, but he's also a noted Boston College professor of political science, and his specialty is environmental justice, environmental and climate policy. And he has just returned from Glasgow. And so we're happy to have him with us, safe and sound again in Belmont. And I'm going to turn the program over to him now so that he can introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Lillian. I am actually delighted to have Angelo, who agreed to come and speak to us tonight on a very important topic. I was lucky enough to meet Angelo where he has been a research scientist since 2020 in MIT's joint program on science and policy of global change. Angelo was an associate professor at the Sao Paulo School of Economics of the Getulio Vargas Foundation in Brazil from 2012 to 2020. There he coordinated the master's program on agribusiness and the Observatory of the Low Carbon Emissions in Agriculture. Before that, he was an associate professor at the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil from 2003 to 2011. And before and now at MIT, he's developed academic and applied research in the fields of agricultural economics, environmental economics, climate policy, land use changes, economic modeling, bioenergy, and biofuels. And I love this presentation when I saw it at MIT, and so I asked Angelo if he'd be willing to join us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dave, for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak to this group. Thank you, Lillian. I would like just to let you guys know that this is a kind of presentation that I prepare with my thoughts about what is going on deforestation in Brazil, given my experience there as a Brazilian and also as a researcher. And in this presentation, there's not much science that I did, not much study that I did researching or investigating deforestation in the Amazon, but a collection of data, information, perceptions, and news about what is going on in terms of deforestation in Brazil. I think I had the opportunity to meet Dave at some of the meetings that we have at the joint program. And I think he saw that the information that I can bring here can help everyone else to get a better idea what are the challenges to deal with deforestation in Brazil, what are the things involved, what are the groups that could benefit or could get damaged by stopping deforestation there. And you are all welcome to ask at any time. Just open your mic and fire your question. If we can make this presentation something more informal, where we feel free to speak and talk and ask and comment things as I go by, just feel free. And I apologize if sometimes I don't make myself clear, since I'm not a native English speaker, and I'm sure I'm going to make a lot of mistakes in the language, with the language as I go by, but I hope you guys can get the message, right? So I'll share my screen here. I hope you can all see my screen. If you don't see it, please let me know, right? So this is a picture of a small share of the Amazon, Brazilian Amazon. We can see here an old river that goes by with several rounds, and just jungle and jungle and jungle for many kilometers. If we think about this issue of deforestation in Brazil and in the tropics in general, we have seen the last 3 or 4 years a lot of news about rising rates of deforestation in Brazil. This is a very new one, and I just brought other. My mouse is not. Other news from big news magazines or companies like The Guardian, New York Times, BBC, and they have highlighted in the last 2-3 years that deforestation rates in the Amazon basin are increasing. Those are concerning news, right? But maybe it's better to have a more in-depth understanding about what is going on. And this is one of those news, the BBC news from almost 1 year ago, actually almost 1 year ago, exactly. And all those news have always the same messages behind that. Usually they say that the main source of deforestation, the main cause, is cattle grazing and soybean production. And they have associated those things with the current president, our president-elect in 2019, Bolsonaro, which is a extreme right-wing politician in Brazil. And he declared several times things that make everyone believe that he is much more in favor of some development in the old-fashioned way of development, and is not very concerned about environment. And it's clear from some of his actions, and it's also clear from some of his speeches. Anyway, those are the main drivers of deforestation in the last 2 years that are in the media. Agriculture, expansion, and the federal government in favor of that, or not being strong enough in terms of fighting against that, right? So the thing can be even more concerning if we look at some news that pops up eventually in the international and in the Brazilian media. And this is a very typical one that reflects the way that the Brazilian federal government works today. This news shows that the Ministry of Defense stopped legal operation, law enforcement operation against deforestation. And this legal operation, usually they identify where the deforestation is happening. They send helicopters with policemen there, and they destroy all the machines, and they find the guys who are doing deforestation. Then the Ministry of Defense asked that operation to stop at some point when it was happening inside an indigenous reserve in Brazil. The indigenous reserve in Brazil, they are protected by law. You cannot do mining or modern agriculture there. Then the Ministry of Defense was asking to stop some law enforcement inside the indigenous area. But the worst thing is that the Ministry of Defense did that because the Ministry of Environment asked him to do that. And why the Ministry of Environment asked him to do that? Because he said that he had a talk with the illegal miners in that area that were doing the deforestation to start mining. and with some representatives of the indigenous people of that reserve, and they were happy with those operations there, with the illegal mining operation. So the Ministry of Environment thought, well, I don't need to obey the law here because people who live in this area are happy with what is going on. Let's not enforce the law. So this gives us a picture about how the government, the federal government, acts in terms of protecting the environment and in terms of obeying the law that they were supposed to be the main enforcement actors of that law, right? So because of those things, it's very common to have this image that the Amazon deforestation is happening because the government that we have now today, besides other drivers like agriculture, mining, illegal logging, and things like that. So the problem seems so bad that we saw 1 year ago, a little bit more than 1 year ago, this publication in a scientific journal that was signed by more than 1,000 people, among researchers, ONG, experts, politicians. They signed this article that was asking to help Brazil to restore the governance that was able to fight against deforestation. And in the article, it's very common to see that in many articles like this, they cite the name of the president in the front page of the article. So they associate that the deforestation that's going there, it's caused mainly by our president, or he's responsible for a major part of that. And it's true in some sense, but it's not the total story behind the deforestation. It's important to see that there are other players that are concerned, that don't want that rate of deforestation to rise in Brazil. So the private sector, most of the big companies in the agribusiness sector and in the financial sector, they know that they are losing consumers around the world because of this rate of deforestation, right? So they promise that they will track their supply chain. The financial system, the financial companies say that they are not going to lend money to those companies that can have some influence in the deforestation. So there's some concern that the private sector seems to be more worried than the public sector at the federal level. And then they just came from COP, and I think one of the good achievements that we saw, or good news that we saw happening in COP, was this agreement among several countries promising that they will stop deforestation by 2030. Of course, it's very easy to sign an agreement. The difficult part is to fulfill this agreement, right? Then several organizations try to put some light on that. So is it possible? Are those countries that commit to stop deforestation, are they concerned about deforestation, or were they concerned about deforestation in the past 3, 4, 5, 10 years? And this is at the right of my slide. It shows some information from the Mongabai, that's a kind of environmental organization, that try to track, okay, what those countries who signed this agreement in COP and those countries who signed a similar agreement in 2014, the New York agreement, saying the same thing, that they were going to stop deforestation in a few years. How is deforestation going on in those countries, right? And then they compare the loss of forest cover in those group of countries, the countries who signed the New York agreement in 2014, and the group of countries who signed the agreement at COP 26. And they say, well, it doesn't seem that they were committed in the past to stop deforestation, to decrease deforestation, because deforestation rates are rising in most of those countries. So we hope that they just change their mind here at COP and they are going to fight against deforestation for sure. And this includes Brazil in this group, but Brazil was not one of the countries signing the agreement in 2014. Well, just moving, let's try to have a better understanding or broader picture about the size of the problem. How bad is the deforestation in Brazil? So if we think in relative terms, if we look at the past, it was much worse in 1995 and 2004. We reached levels of deforestation that were really high, like 29,000 kilometers square, 27,000 kilometers square. What are the levels nowadays? So in 2020, we deforest 11,000 kilometers squares. And we could just, in a comparative way, say, well, we just deforest only 11,000, right? Because we had much higher rates in the past. And when we had those high rates, we also had a lot of environmental organizations complaining about that and worried about that. But not, it seems that complaint or that behavior was not so strong as today. Today, we see not only the environmental organizations, but several governments of foreign countries and several actors and players around the world really much more concerned than they were in 2004 or 1995. And of course they are, because today each ton of carbon that we release make the problem worse, or our budget of carbon reduce to keep us safe in a 1.5 or 2.5 warming level, right? But I think the worst part is the trend. If we look what happened since 2004 in Brazil, the country was very successful to fight against deforestation, to reduce deforestation until 2012. After 2012, the rates start to raise. And then Bolsonaro came in power in 2019. So since 2012, we have some slowly increase in the rate of deforestation. So it's not something that happened just because of the current president. It was happening before. And there is a lot of explanation behind that. We saw a crisis, economic crisis in Brazil starting in 2014. 2015 and 2016, Brazil had negative growth rates, and all the world was growing, and just Brazil was shrinking its economy. And the major cause of that was a public debt that was just going to the roof. And then we have a political process, and Brazil had impeachment of a president. So it was a lot of problems in terms of the politics and public debt. And the money that was flowing to fight against deforestation and to try to develop the regions where we have deforestation, protecting the environment at the same time, this money just stopped, it finished. Then local population wasn't happy to fight against deforestation and don't receive any reward or any transfers from the rest of the country. Then a lot of the problems that we start to see about rising deforestation rates after 2012 was lack of money to enforce the policies against deforestation, and local population who were not happy about protecting the environment and not receiving transfers from the rest of the country. I will talk more about that, but just let's try to have a better picture about the Amazon. This is a picture about the vegetation, the natural vegetation in the Amazon. The dark green areas are the forest, the jungle, and the light yellow here are parts of the Amazon that don't have forest anymore. They are used for pasture, for agriculture, or for roads, but they don't have, they lost almost all the cover. So if we look in relative terms, this picture, there is still a lot of forest there. Tropical forest is still big, exuberant, and strong. and it's something like 80% of the total Amazon biome. That's all this area in the map. Almost 80% still alive. It's very hard to find another tropical area in the world, a tropical forest, that has 80% of its pristine original cover, right? Anyway, there are a lot of information that we can grasp from this picture, right? The first thing, most of the deforestation comes from the south, right? So Brazil was colonized in the coastline, and agriculture was expanding from the south, and it reached the center-west part of Brazil and keep growing toward the north. We can see that around the Amazon River and its affluents, we have a lot of deforestation also, right? So those are the communities, the big cities, the capitals that are along the river. And we see that when there is a road connecting far distance in the Amazon, at the sides of this road arise a kind of deforestation pattern that looks like a fish spine. So also you open the road, a lot of smaller roads are opened along this road and give access to the deeper areas of forest, and then people start to claim in those areas and clearing those areas to sell to some farmer in the future, or to raise cattle, or to have as an asset that they can profit in the future. So this is the big about how the Amazon is today, and let's try to look at in other ways. So this is how the total vegetation in Brazil is distributed, not only the Amazon, okay, in the entire country. In 2017, half of the country was forests and pristine forest. Most of that natural forest in the same state that Portuguese found when they arrived in the 1500s, okay? And then we still have a lot of savanna formation there, what we call cerrado in Brazil. So together, those natural vegetation are almost 65–70% of the country today. The area dedicated to pasture and cropland is relatively small compared to the total country. So this picture gives a lot of feel for people in the agribusiness sector, in the agriculture sector, or even in the federal government to say, well, why are the world complaining about deforestation in Brazil if we still have more than 50% of our country as native vegetation? If we are able to produce a lot of exports for the world, a lot of food for the world, not only for Brazilians, for export, Brazil is the biggest net exporter in the world. Why are people complaining if we use just a few piece of our land, something like 20%, 25%, 30% of the land, and still preserve that much? So it's a kind of defensive way that Brazilians used to behave when someone point the finger and say, well, you are damaging the environment, you are destroying the Amazon, you are doing something bad. And people say, well, all the world has done that before us, and we still have much more forest than the average country in the world. So why are people complaining? Well, I understand that there is this right, this claim of, okay, we still have a lot of land there. We are using just a relatively small area, 30% of the country to produce agriculture. But I'm really concerned as a Brazilian about the movie. If we take the picture of 2017, it seems that we are in good shape. Nobody should point the fingers to Brazilians because they are burning the Amazon, right? Because there's still a lot of natural vegetation there. But if we look at the movie, if we look at 1985, the trend is not good. And if the trend continues, we know that this 50%, in some years will not be more than 30%, 40%, or 25%, right? So I think the hard part is to convince Brazilians that we know the picture is still So still more or less good, or still better compared to other countries. But the movie that we see is not a good movie, right? And I'm going to do the same here in a map. So this is the picture in 2017. It's not bad. If we compare with many countries in the world, relatively, there are much more natural vegetation in Brazil than in most of the major countries in the world, US, all the Europe together, China, India. India has only 10% of its natural vegetation. So we're still in a much better shape than other countries, right? And in this picture, the colors are the same from the previous picture. So tropical forest is dark green, light green is savanna, and yellow is pastures, and this pink here is crop. So this is the picture, but let's look at the movie. This was 1985, this is 2017. So if we just look at the picture, it seems all right. But if we look at the movie is quite scary, right? So the amount of yellow areas that pop up in the map from 1985 to 2017 is really huge and concerning, because if the movie keeps on like this, we will see those yellow lines, these yellow areas covering half of the Amazon one day, right? And I think as humanity, we don't want to see that. And as Brazilians who live here far away from the jungle, they don't like the movie. But Brazilians who live here, there are a mix of different views about that, and concerning views from one part, and I think important claims from others. Then I'm going to try to deal with those things in a minute. So this is another way to look at this movie. At the left side, we have the picture for 1985, and in the right side, 2017. It's interesting to see that a big chunk of the forest becomes agriculture areas, but there were agriculture areas that went back to a forest state, just because people deforested in areas that were not suitable for agriculture, or people claim area, try to sell to some cattle rancher, and nobody show up to buy it, and they just abandon the land. Well, let's try to understand a little bit of the political problems behind the deforestation in the Amazon. The way the governance, the land governance in Brazil, and how the policies work with that. So this is what we call in Brazil the Amazon biome, is the area that by nature should be some jungle there. And actually there was jungle when the Portuguese arrived in the 1500s. This cover almost half of the Brazilian territory. But the way that Brazilians managed to deal with that area was we can see that those are the board of states in Brazil. And some states, 3 states in particular, they have a chunk of the area under the Amazon biome and a chunk under the savanna or other biomes. And these are the Mato Grosso state, Tocantins state, and Maranhão state. So here becomes a little bit of challenge to deal with the Amazon problem. Those states that have more than one biome, the Amazon and other biome, they have laws that are usually made to the entire state to deal with the environmental problems in a single way. But the environmental problems in the Amazon are different from the savanna areas. Another problem is that at some point, Brazilians decide to call all the states that had at least a bit of the Amazon biome as legal Amazon states. And when we measure deforestation rates, we are measuring deforestation rates in the legal Amazon. So a part of the deforestation rate that we see in the statistics is not Amazon forest biome being deforested. It's also savanna area being deforested. And it gets mixed up. The amount of carbon and the biodiversity in the Cerrado are much lower than in the Amazon forest, but they're still very important. but they are like 1/3 or 1/4 of the biodiversity and carbon storage that the Amazon biome has. But in terms of monitoring of the Amazon, we decide to use this concept of legal Amazon. And then it makes those states here, Mato Grosso and Maranhão, in a kind of conflicting zone because they are not part of the Amazon biome as entirely, and they don't identify themselves as the Amazon biome. Why? Because another way that the Brazilian political system has organized the country was to break up the state, to group the states in macro regions. And those macro regions have specific development policies, development bank, and characteristics. So this big state here, the Mato Grosso, it's in the center-west part. So it doesn't feel like someone in the Amazon. They feel like they are in the center-west part, which is the most important agriculture area in Brazil today. Actually, the Mato Grosso state is the major producer of soybean and corn in Brazil. And they behave like the other center-west states as major crop producers. And then it's harder to them to feel that they should protect the Amazon as the Amazon states, as the North macro region states. So to give some sense how big is the Amazon or the Amazon biome, the Amazon biome is larger than most of the Europe, and the amount of forest preserved in the Amazon is larger than all those countries together, or it's almost equivalent to the area of those countries. So we could cover almost all the Europe, or more than half of the Europe, with the vegetation that is in the Amazon. It makes the defensive position for the Brazilian government and people who don't care too much about deforestation. It gives an argument to them. So, okay, why are you Europeans worried about the Amazon deforestation if we have much more vegetation than you Europeans have? You historically have deforested all the Europe, and now you are pointing the fingers to us, and we still have much more forest than you guys. So again, this is one of the arguments that Brazilians who are not worried about deforestation used to use against Macron or any other political leader or superstars that start to complaining about deforestation in the Amazon. And if you compare the different biomes in Brazil, the Amazon is not the biome who is more threatened. It's not the biome that is most endangered. If you look at the other biomes in Brazil, all of other biomes have less natural vegetation left compared to the Amazon. And it's astonishing what has happened with the Atlantic forest in Brazil. Most of the population in Brazil, it's in the Atlantic forest biome. And the average person living in this area, they are in favor of protecting the Amazon. But they even don't know that the biome where they live has less than 15% of the natural vegetation left. So it's very easy to tell other people to protect the area, and the backyard where they live is not protected, right? So among Brazilians, there are this kind of divergence. Brazilians who are in the place with less forest would like those Brazilians who are in the place with more forest to protect them. And then it becomes challenging to confront the different opinions about that. So inside the Amazon, most of deforestation is happening in the land that we call as public land or unregistered areas. So half of the Amazon is protected by law. It's some kind of conservation unit, indigenous reserves, or extractivist reserves. It doesn't mean that it's protected against deforestation. It means that by law, if someone deforested area, they should go to jail. They are committing environmental crime. They should have their equipment destroyed and so on. But as I showed to you guys at the beginning of my presentation, there are some parts that there are some times in Brazil that even the top ministers don't want to obey the law, right? And then there are 60%, 26% of the Amazon biome. It's under some kind of farm or private owned land. And Brazil has some laws and some rules about how those guys can use that land. And the biggest challenge is about those 25% because they are free to be claimed by anyone. They are public lands, and the government doesn't have, the state doesn't have the means to protect that area. So most of the deforestation today is happening in this area, but there is some deforestation going on those protected areas. And also there are some deforestation going on in private owned lands. If we look at the protected areas in Brazil, as they are most half of the Amazon biome, it's interesting to see that most of those protected areas are in an area that's very hard to reach by anyone trying to claim land or to clear land, right? But there are some indigenous reserves just in that area where we see a lot of yellow color in my previous map, a lot of pastures or some plantation. So this here is usually used by our current president and those people who are not concerned about deforestation to say, well, see, if we sum up all those conservation units in Brazil, they are larger than most of the countries in Europe. So why are you guys complaining about deforestation going on in the country if we are protecting a lot of those areas, right? But again, those will sum up to 50% of the area. For sure, we don't want to see the other 50% being burned. 20% of the area is already cleared. We don't want that to reach 50% of the area or even 30% of the Amazon legal biome. Just to give you some idea how important are those protected areas, look at this specific indigenous reservation here, is the Xingu Reservation. If you look at the map that I showed before, it's exactly this same area here that is surrounded by pastures, plantations, and still some savanna around. Look at this island here of forest. It's exactly this reservation, indigenous reservation here. So there is some important role for those areas that are protected. The indigenous area, in average, have much less deforestation than the other areas. Just because the indigenous people protect that area or try to protect that, and they still live in a style of life that's in kind of harmony with the jungle. And then it makes them much less intensive in the use of the land than the regular non-indigenous Brazilians. It's a picture of those indigenous areas, and they are, if we sum up those areas, they are the size, they are larger than Portugal, they are almost the size of Spain and other major countries in Europe. So how does it work, the area that has some private ownership, those areas that are farms? Well, in the Amazon biome, the environmental law about how you can use the land, what we call forest code, it mandates that if you are a farmer there, you should protect 80% of your area and you can use only 20%. It means that if I'm an entrepreneur and I decide to buy a plot of land in the Amazon today, I can use only 20% of what I have bought. And I must I have the obligation to protect the 100%. If there is some burning in some of my area, it's my responsibility. So I need to buy 100 and protect 100, but I can use only 20. For me, it seems that when this law was passed, was clear to say that private businessmen, private entrepreneurs, don't go to the Amazon. It will not be profitable to you to buy a farm in the Amazon because you can only use only 20% of that. You cannot use more than that, and you must protect the rest, right? Of course, there are some exceptions on that regarding people who bought the land in the 1970s and 1980s when this law was not in place. So those exceptions are something like you can use 50% of the land, you should protect the other 50%. But there are not many properties in that condition in the Amazon. Anyway, this is the law. One problem is that the law is different around the country. So in the Amazon, if you are a farmer there, you must protect 80% of the area. If you are in the legal Amazon, that is this black, the area inside this black line, but you are not in the Amazon biome, you are in the savanna biome, you don't need to protect 80%. You need to protect only 35%. And if you are anywhere in the rest of the country, you must protect only 20%. So you can imagine that a farmer in the Amazon, when he looks at the law outside of the biome, in the savanna areas or in the Atlantic forest area, he said, well, it's not fair. It's quite unfair with me that I need to protect all the area, but use only 20%, while people in the rest of the country can use as much as they want. And they usually claim that, okay, they are doing that. They are asking me to protect more because they already have destroyed the nature that they have around them. They have destroyed their biomes. And now they want me to do their job. So there's a lot of conflict among people inside the Amazon and outside of the Amazon about what is the justice, what is the environmental justice that they should follow, what's the right law. So it's quite easy to see that people don't want to obey the law here in the Amazon, right? Or even some farmer that wants to grab a larger piece of land, so I'm going to sell it here, move here, but I'm not going to obey the law because the law here was different for me, why it should be different there, right? So we have this problem of how to manage, how to do the governance of this if we have so different rules for the people inside the Amazon and the people outside the Amazon. And when we think about those claimed as major drivers of the Amazon deforestation, cattle ranching, and soybean production, soybean production is not really some big deal in terms of driving directly the deforestation. Most of the soybean production in Brazil, it's outside of the Amazon, and it's in the state that has a lot of the Amazon biome inside. But when we look where those areas are, most of those areas of soybean are in the savanna biome in this state. So when people claim that deforestation is happening because soybean production is advancing on the Amazon, usually it's not true. What happens usually, it's someone claim a land, clear the land, claim the title, the legal title of the land, and sell to a cattle rancher. The cattle rancher later on may may not sell that plot of area to a soybean producer, but usually it becomes a cattle rancher, a cattle production for many years. And we don't see most of the soybean producers very enthusiastic to go to this area. And the reason is simply the Amazon area is a tropical area. So the tropic just cuts here. The best environment to grow soybean, it's in the south. Soybean grains, they come from a temperate zone. And Brazil has domesticated the soybean to this area between the tropic and the equator. The equator line is right here, and the tropical line is right here. So this area just became good for soybean production because we had genetic selection of soybean seeds with intensive research for many years that made it suitable for here, but it's still not very suitable to a very humid and hot area like here close to the equator. Okay. Anyway, soybean is not the major driver. It's not the soybean producer who is clearing the land. Usually, who clears the land is someone who wants to grab the possession of the land and sell that land to someone else, usually a cattle rancher. In the area of corn, we see that it's just a small piece of the area of corn. It's surrounding the Amazon. But if we look at the pasture areas, today we have a large pasture area in the Amazon. Actually, as the forest was being cleared here, the first activity that was put in place was cattle ranching. And there is something interesting behind that. The environmental, one of the development laws in Brazil says that if you clear a piece of land, and if you stay there for 5 years using that land in some productive way, you can claim that it's your land. You can go to the register of land and say, this is my land because I have been using it for 5 years. If you clear the land, and if you don't do nothing with that, you just let the forest grow back, it becomes an unproductive land, and you cannot claim that it's your land. So there's a kind of perverse incentive to clear land and to put some cattle there. Then you can claim that's your land, it's your asset, and you can do whatever you want with that later. You can sell to someone else. So there is a kind of informal market in Brazil of land grabbing. There are a kind of industry of land grab in Brazil where some rich entrepreneurs have hired a lot of equipment and people of the local to do this kind of clearing of land and then claim the land later and selling that for cattle ranchers or soybean producers in the future. And this picture at the right gives some idea about how much cattle it's around the country. And those areas are colored by the size of the municipality. And municipality in the Amazon are really huge in terms of area. So it does this red here doesn't mean that we have a cattle concentrate all of here. It's just the municipality is so big and has a large cattle herd there. Then it gives a false impression that we have just a large concentration of cattle in all those areas. No, the area of the municipality that is big. But it's still those municipalities here in the Amazon today are among the major cattle producers in the country. Well, this picture is very nice to see that the concept of the arch of deforestation, it's all around this cattle ranching area that comes from the south, and it seems that it's moving up inside the Amazon as time passes. Years pass, people are going deeper and deeper in this area and deforesting. So how many people live in the Amazon? Not much. In terms of the relative size of the Brazilian population, only 14% of the Brazilian population is in this huge area. And then for someone like the current president who came from a military background, and the military in Brazil in the past had this concern about Brazil being a so huge country, hard to defend the frontiers. We should protect against possible invasions from other South American countries here. We should occupy the land because the land is very, the density of occupation is very low. So there is a kind of a concept among the militaries that we should occupy this area because this area could be invaded or claimed by someone else. And actually, this area is very low occupied because the colonization started here. in the coastline and most here in the central south part. And then it took a long time to get at this part of the land, and this part is very hard to conquer in terms of occupation because of the jungle. So there are many stories about ferry companies that try to build roads or railroads inside the Amazon, and after some years, the jungle ate the railroad because the conditions, the humidity, the way the depreciation of the capital was very strong in this heavily rained area, right? So the Brazilian president says, well, it's too much area for so few Brazilians. We should do this. We should let Brazilians to occupy that better, be more democratic about those people who are just jumped here in the São Paulo city, why they don't move there and have a better life, more space to live. So there is this vision that we should occupy that, and then the development in this way should go against the vegetation, the natural vegetation that is there. So what kind of people live there? We have some big cities, a small number of huge capitals like here, this is Manaus, the capital of the state of the Amazon. And what's beautiful about Manaus is that it resembles any other major city in Brazil with some nice architecture, some buildings, modern buildings. And then you can see the other side of the river, that's pure jungle, right? It's just a huge area of jungle. And if you, this is a kind of, they have a lot of beaches, river beaches here where people enjoy for pleasure, but it's still kind of amazing to see how there is this big city one side of the river, and far away in the other side of the river, we have only forest. But all huge city in Brazil has its own problems in terms of favelas, and the favelas in this area are even worse than the favelas in the south. They are really poor neighborhoods with a lot of pollution, with lack of any infrastructure. These maybe 50% of population are under this condition in a huge city like that. But then we have in the middle of the jungle, this kind of population. Those people who live by the river, and they just get at the city by boat, and they are far away from any infrastructure. They don't have hospitals, they don't have schools. They are just isolated in the jungle. And there are the reserves, we call extractivist reserves, where people are allowed to make some profit from rubber or from nuts or from other system that is not a traditional agriculture system. And there are the indigenous people who are in those indigenous area or have migrated to the cities, right? People in those places have different opinions about what to do with the forest. And then and this behavior has changed through time. So people in the city usually see the forest as a kind of barrier to development, right? So if we have that much of jungle, we have less roads, we have less malls, we have less agriculture. So why should we keep that much forest, right? In the other side, we have the indigenous people who still live in some traditional way inside those indigenous reserves, but not all the indigenous people want to protect the forest. Some of them are convinced that the style of life that they live should be different, should be better, should be improved, or they are in a poor reserve where they cannot make enough food for them. They would prefer to sell cheap piece of land or some deforestation to illegal miners or cattle ranchers. So there's not total agreement among those people what should be done in terms of protecting, but the majority is still in favor of protecting the indigenous areas. And those people here just so poor. They lack everything, that they don't know how to live a better life. Then for them, it's just the jungle is good enough. And when they move to the city, they know that they will become in this kind of neighborhood. So the trade-off for them is living like this in the city or living like this in the jungle. So what happened in terms of the choice that those people have done in the last election, when the Bolsonaro president, who is not much in favor of protecting the Amazon, has won? So this is the Bolsonaro guy. The Brazilian presidential election has 2 rounds. The first round, everybody can compete, and then they get the 2 best, the 2 guys who had more votes, and they go to a second round. If no one gets more than 50% of the votes, they get the 2 best, the 2 guys with most votes, and go to the second round. So what happened in the first round? So these are the Amazon states, right? They are the states with the Amazon biome. Only 2 of those states didn't vote the majority for Bolsonaro. So all the other Amazon states were in favor of Bolsonaro, and only Pará and Maranhão didn't vote for Bolsonaro. What happened in the second round? Bolsonaro won in all those states here, besides Pará and Maranhão. Okay, and even in the Amazon state, this huge, although most of people vote for the red party, the other candidate, this is the city, this island of green here is just the city that I showed in the last picture. Manaus is the capital. The majority of population of the Amazon state is here in this city. Something like 70% of all the population of this big state is concentrated here in the Manaus city, and they vote for Bolsonaro. Then last year, when the pandemic was going very badly in Brazil, a poll in all the capitals, those are the name of the capitals in Brazil, a poll about how they were realizing what was the perception about the Brazilian president, so on. At that point, the cities that most favor Bolsonaro, with more than 50% of agreement that he was doing a good government, all those cities are the capitals of the states in the Amazon. So there is a kind of perception today that people in that region, the average citizen in that area, or the average person in that area, at least until October 2020, was in favor of this president who doesn't care about the Amazon, who doesn't care about the protection of the environment in the Amazon, who thinks that the development of the Amazon should be the traditional way of development that removes the jungle and use the land for something else. Sell the wood, get the gold, and do farming on that. So those people were in favor of that. And there is a lot of context behind that should be put. Until 2012, when we saw the decreasing rates of deforestation in the Amazon, that area, all the Amazon biome, all the states there were receiving a lot of transfers from the southeast part of the country. So there was a lot during the left-wing party, the Labour Party in Brazil, when they governed the country for almost 16 years, they had a lot of programs that put money in the pocket of the people around here. A lot of the development bank of the region was financing people to buy houses, to open a small business. There was a lot of transfers to that region to poor families. And then it seems that people were happy with that idea. Okay, we can protect the environment if there's some way of develop ourselves getting money from abroad, from outside of the region. But then we had a crisis in 2015. And then the money stopped flowing to that region. And then the perception around the region started to change. Say, okay, if we cannot receive transfer from the rest of the country, what are we going to do? How can we protect all this jungle area? And we cannot produce crops, we cannot raise cattle, we cannot sell the wood, we cannot mine those rich lands. It's not fair. We don't like that kind of development strategy where we just starve and the rest of the country goes well. So it seems that the political perception start to change toward the right-wing party of Bolsonaro. Then it's a kind of complicated issue how to stop deforestation there without convincing local people that they should preserve the forest. So they should give up the traditional way of development to a new way that we even don't know exactly how it is or how it works. And they should give up producing things, and they should produce environmental goods and import all the rest from the other parts of the country. So it's quite hard to convince local people about those things, right? And this is a picture that just shows how the growth rate in Brazil in this X here, this line, has been jumping around. And then we have this 2015, 2016 crisis where GDP was decreasing by more than 2% per year, 2 years in a row. And then it was reflecting the total GDP here in the blue bars that show that GDP has decreased. And one of the major parts of the country who was hit for that crisis was the Amazon region. So Brazil had some policies in place that helped to fight deforestation. One of them was called the Plan to Control Deforestation in the Amazon, PPCDAM, and it was based on several strategies. One of them was monitoring the area and enforcing the law. At the moment that you captured some deforestation from the smoke coming from the deforestation, the radar, the monitoring system was able to identify that on time, and then a helicopter full of officials from the government went there and stopped the deforestation process. When it started happening here in 2015, it changed. 2005, it changed the behavior. Most of those big business to do deforestation start losing money with all that destruction of their equipment, and then they reduce the size of the operations. They try to reduce the size of the deforestation to a small plot that could not be captured by the satellite, but it became much more expensive to do it that way, right? And this policy seems to be successful until 2012, and then it just kicked around, and then finally, in the last 4 years, it just grew. We had the protected areas during the 1980s, from the 1980s until 2010. The federal government created a lot of those reserves. And we have this forest code that if you own a plot of land, what you can do in that land, how much you should protect. And in the case of the Amazon, you should protect 80%, what make most of this area unprofitable if you buy the entire plot. And then Brazil has agreed to go to the Paris Agreement in 2015 with his own national determined contribution, that the major action on that was to stop deforestation, illegal deforestation, the deforestation that's not allowed by this forest code. Brazil claimed that would stop that by 2030. So this is the monitoring system. We have satellites covering all the area, and we can capture when the deforestation is happening, and then can enforce the law there. And it shows here how the deforestation. Yes, someone would like to ask something? Okay, so it shows again how deforestation has evolved through time, and what was our goal in our climate policy that was started in 2010. So we had a volunteer climate policy that we would reduce deforestation by some level and reach lower deforestation. But 2020, we had more than 10,000 kilometers square of deforested area. It shows again how things go. I think this is the concerning thing. We knew how to reduce deforestation, and at some point we lost those policies. And then the Brazilian national contribution, determined contribution for the Paris Agreement was to reduce emissions. Brazil was one of the few developing countries who committed to reduce its level of emissions by a big amount by 2025, 2030, relative to 25. So it was a target similar to many developed countries. But there's a trick on that. It becomes relatively easy to reach those levels because we had a very high level of deforestation in 2005. So we had too much emissions in 2005 because we deforested too much that year, and we saw that deforestation was going down after that. So it was easy to commit to those goals. So the environmental folks say that our commitment was shy. The agribusiness sector said, no, we commit too much. No other developing country has committed that much. Okay, and then depending the way you look at the issue, you would agree with both sides, right? Then the major strategy was to end illegal deforestation. But then when Bolsonaro assumed, first he said that he was going to get out of the Paris Agreement. And last year, the Minister of Environment, who was fired some months later because some corruption scandal, he was involved in some selling of illegal wood from the Amazon. That Minister of Environment has committed at the end of last year to keep those goals, 37 and 43%, but he didn't commit to how he was going to achieve that. So it was a study that we did some years ago, trying to understand how the Brazil could achieve the NDC of Paris Agreement. And these are kind of projection that how the Brazilian emissions would grow in the future. And these are the commitments that Brazil made. So when we implement in an economic model, this commitment, what happens with the country, with the economy of the country? So the commitments try to follow this line. This is our business as usual emissions. And then when we try to enforce in our model all the agreements that Brazil has mentioned, stop illegal deforestation, implement energy efficiency and those things, we were not able to achieve the target that Brazil has committed in our model. And then when we implement some tax or some cap and trade, we can achieve that. And then we try to calculate the cost. But what we realized doing that study that most of the commitment could be achieved until 2030 just by stopping deforestation. If we stop deforestation, it will be the business as usual emissions from land use change, from deforestation. And if we just reduce deforestation enough, all the other sectors in the economy would do just a little bit of reduction in emissions. Most of the constraint is being achieved by reducing deforestation. Well, the cheapest and easiest way to do when we did this work in the past, and we got very low costs of doing that in our economic model. And then there's this kind of agreement among the agribusiness sector. We don't need to deforest 1 hectare of land anymore because we have enough land to keep growing agriculture for many years, just improving yields. But we know that in practice, the agriculture frontier still is expanding onto the Amazon. So this is something curious about our national determined contribution, that when we announced that in the Paris Agreement in 2015, our emissions in 2005, our reference emissions, was something like 2.1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. 3 months after we announced our commitment to reduce emissions by 37% and 43%, we had some improvement in our measurements of emissions for 2005, and those emissions grow up to 2.7 billion tons. And then last year, our former Ministry of Environment just said, okay, we will keep our commitment, but not related to this baseline of 2005 old measurements, old inventory, greenhouse gas inventory. We use the new inventory. So in absolute terms, Brazil needs to make a smaller effort than it has committed in 2015. So we're still ambitious relatively to other countries, but as we just increased emissions here by the methodology of calculating those emissions, become easier to achieve this level and this level. Actually, emissions today in Brazil are very close to this level here. We just need to keep those emissions constant that we will reach our commitment. It shows it here. This is the target, but here it's not accounting the sequestration of land use. The pristine forest in Brazil sequesters some share of those emissions. So those emissions are a little bit lower when we get net emissions. Here is just the gross emissions. So another study that we have done in the past was trying to understand what are the costs for the Brazilian economy if we stop deforestation now, or if we stop by 2030, or we just stop the illegal deforestation and allow some deforestation to happen if it's inside the forest code, the legal deforestation that farmers can do. We calculate the areas that will be legally deforested and how much would cost for the economy if we just stop those deforestation. And then what we found was that these are the trajectories of deforestation in Brazil in our economic model without any effort to stop deforestation. And then if we implement scenarios to stop deforestation, we would preserve that much forest, or we would see some deforestation to some level and it would stop. The same would happen in the natural grasslands. Here, actually, those are much more savanna areas. Those areas are deforesting much faster than the natural forest. And if we enforce those deforestation anti-deforestation scenarios, we would see, instead of that amount of total emissions going on to the atmosphere, emissions would drop at the first year if we stop now, or we would release much less carbon in this area below that curve under those policies to stop deforestation. So what are the economic impacts of that? In our economic model, those costs are really, really low. We have decrease in consumption and in GDP by less than 0.1%. So the most decrease that we could see is 0.06%, 0.05% of decrease in GDP. So the economy will not get hurt if we stop deforestation. Why? Because we still have a lot of land that could be intensified, could be better used for agriculture. Of course, the agriculture sector would have less assets, less land to work with, and would lose here something like 1.5, 1% or 0.5% of its output. It doesn't make any difference in terms of Brazilian exports and the size of the Brazilian agriculture sector. For the livestock sector, there is a little bit more loss, but it's still quite low compared to the amount of carbon you could preserve, the amount of forest and biodiversity you could preserve. And then at some point, you try to calculate, okay, how much we could pay in terms of environmental services that would make those farmers agree to stop deforestation, to compensate that loss. And those numbers here, we could get in 2050 something like close to $8 billion per year, what is smaller than what we make available today for farmers in Brazil under our agriculture credit program. So it's feasible to do that. We have ways to do that, but we need to see a lot of change in will to do that, since the average person in the Amazon today is not really happy about stopping the deforestation. So I think I talked too much. I was expecting that some of guys would ask something in the middle. I hope it was not so boring that nobody had any question.
I've got a question. Thank you for all that. That's interesting. One of the things I feel that, with all this, isn't the core of trying to stop deforestation, though, looking at the demand side, and isn't the demand side, you can't have a discussion without talking about China and Brazil, because isn't all this beef going to China and iron ore and everything? So isn't China inextricably related to this? Because they're investing in Brazil and building even railroads so that they can transport all their stuff to China. So how do we manage that?
Well, I think it's a very fair point, and I think it has some part of the problem has to do with global demand, for sure. And then it's common to see that some parts of some groups of farmers say, well, doesn't matter if Europe doesn't buy our soybean and our cattle coming from the Amazon. We still have the Chinese, right? But if we look at the deep down to the problem, I think it's much more difficult than that. It's not only stopping China desire for more products, right? We have it's quite easy to think about grabbing some asset that's called land in that area and selling that to someone else in the future. It's a free land. So if you are in the neighborhood of that area, or you realize that it's a kind of profitable business, and the law is very weak to avoid you to doing that, it's just, well, let me grab some land and I have some asset for free. It's not for free. You need to build the operation to clear the area, but you sell the good wood that's there, right? And you can sell the land to someone else. And then besides that, this has been the development model that we have followed as humans through the earth. Okay, every single country has done that. And we are in the edge of fighting for new environmental models, but those are not established yet. And they are much harder to establish among people who are very low educated and is poor and it's starving and doesn't have other ways to see a way for development in the future. So I think we should shift that development model. We must convince people there that say, okay, you can develop, you can get a better life, you can sell, you can send your kids to school, you can go to the mall, you can drive a nice car, you can travel around the world, your trip, your vacation, but you must preserve the forest. Then from one point of view, okay, it's easy, just pay for the environmental service that's out there. Okay, but once you pay that guy, you must convince him that he needs to import everything else from other place. He cannot develop that place to anything else, right? So it's the development model that we are seeking for, we didn't find it yet. We have some ideas, or we have some small scale things going on that have some success. But even the Amazon, they had some projects there to build some companies based on the latex, on the rubber from the extractivist forest. They failed. They had, they didn't profit. They had, they collapsed. They become in debt, and they had to close the doors. They have, there are some Brazilian company, cosmetic company that try to develop local chains to provide essence chemicals from the forest, but they are very small scale. They don't reach enough people to make that transformation of people local say, okay, we can develop with this jungle around us. We can develop a good style of life, keeping the forest. We didn't find that model yet. And if we don't find that, we need to remove people from there, or deforestation will not stop, right? So what are the options that we will give to those people to convince them that it's better to keep the forest alive? This is the challenge, because no other place in the world that has reached a high level of development was able to keep that much amount of forest around, right?
So I think, Angelo, I think the reason why no one's asking you any questions is because you have given us so much information and we're still digesting it.
Okay.
And so
Sorry for that.
no,
Was a
it's
lot.
really very comprehensive. And I know that I certainly have learned a tremendous amount about Brazil. Does anybody have any other questions or any comments? Dave, do you have any response at all to what Angelo has presented tonight?
Well, the question that probably isn't answerable, but I'm going to ask Angelo anyway, is, given what's happened with COVID and all of this, the Brazilian senator's investigation of the president and, the idea of crimes against the society and so forth, what about the presidential election coming up? Right? I mean, you can't predict the outcome.
Yes, well, it seems that Bolsonaro is losing popularity. It has something like 15 to 20% of people who is really for him, that loves him for some reason. There are other 30, 40, 30 of it, maybe 25, 30% who is always very attached to the left party, the one that Lula is the major figure. And there is a big chunk of people who is just in between, say, okay, I don't want the left, I don't want the right. I want something more in the middle, in the center. But we don't have any politician, any big figure, anyone at this point has arisen as a good name to compete. So what we have is old politicians, and old politicians in Brazil have that image of corruption in the system, or being those guys who are in the politics for many years, and they were the son of someone who was a politician before, and they were just there because they are rich. So there is some feeling against the politicians. But I think today in Brazil, we focus too much in the president. The president doesn't have that much power as the Congress. And the average Brazilian don't know who they vote for Congress. It's not something that we care about. Who is the senator? Who is the House representative that you choose? Most of people don't choose, they just choose the party because they don't know who are the guys there, right? And then those guys have more power today by the Brazilian constitution. They can impeach the president. They can stop anything that the president tries to do. And usually in Brazil, it works by the negotiation. If the president is able to negotiate and exchange things with them, they get their laws passed. If they are not able to negotiate, and Bolsonaro is not good in negotiating anything, the president cannot do that. And the advantage of Lula was that Lula was a guy from a left party, from the Labour Party, that doesn't made a government of the left. He made a center government. He made agreement with everyone. He chose as a vice president a guy from the business party. So he showed since the beginning, I'm not going to be the guy from the left party, from the Labour Party. I'm going to be a guy in the center. And then he was successful because a lot of corruption. He was able to bribe most of the senators, most of the House representatives to vote for his ideas. And he never did any decision much to the left or to the right. He always tried to get some consensus among them. His worst action was to choose the next president, our former president who received the impeachment. He chose someone who was not able to negotiate, and she was really a left-wing politician. And when she started to mess too much with the economy, people say, okay, let's get rid of that woman because she's controlling prices, she's doing crazy things, she's not allowing the business to flow, then they get rid of her.
It
And then
sounds
because
like, it
I'm
sounds
sorry.
like the politics in Brazil is just as complicated as it is here. And I think
Yes.
I'm just mindful of the time because
Okay.
our program is usually over at 9. And so I would love to have any final questions about Angelo or his presentation before we take the last question and then have to say goodnight. No, I think there
Well,
aren't any. Well,
while people are thinking, I want to ask if Angela knows what's driving the cattle grazing process and business. I mean, is it demand in Brazil or is it mainly a profitable export?
It's China.
It's a good question. Brazil, it's a really big meat consumer. 75% of the meat stay in the country. It's a kind of, in Brazil, it's a kind of, if you can eat meat every day, it's a status. You become middle class or rich, right? If you cannot eat meat, you're still poor. So we have the sense that meat is something very important for your life, and it's a status to be able to eat meat. But 25 to 30% is exports, and it's still a lot of markets in Asia that can open up. But the average yield productivity, cattle productivity in Brazil is very low. We could improve a lot in the south, in the center west, if we just manage better the land, right? And the richest cattle ranchers today in Brazil in the south, they just understood that they could manage better the land and have 2 or 3 cows per hectare. And then they don't need more areas. The thing is, there's the process of grabbing land, grabbing asset, and cattle is the first thing that you use in the land to claim the land to be yours. And there's a mix of not only demand pushing for more meat, but cheap input, that's the land, to be put in place. It's cheaper to open more land than to intensify your land and do better practice on that, right? In the south, where you cannot spend land anymore, you just improve the land. In the north, you grab more land because it's cheaper.
And I don't suppose there's a big increase in pasturing around the trees rather than cutting them down. The whole idea of joint.
Yeah, the process is slow. First, they remove the most valuable trees and they sell that wood illegally. Then after that, they just make all the forest go down, and then they put together and they burn that. After the first burning, they start raising cattle in the rest of that forest. And it's a very, very low productivity kind of cattle system. And then as cattle is eating that residues, you are clearing more of the land. Then after 2 or 3 years in that process, burning and put the cattle to eat the rest, you have a clear land. So it's a slow process. It doesn't go like immediately. But sometimes we have the sense that, well, there is a fire strip just eating the Amazon. No, it's just the edge, just the edge. The Amazon is much bigger than that.
thank you. It was really quite inspiring to hear you speak about this country that you love. And Dave, do you want to say anything about the next program?
Well, we're going to pick up on Angelo's talk and do a comparison across countries and kind of see how the comparative lineup looks in terms of deforestation and land use, developing renewable energy, peaking greenhouse gas emissions, and so forth. And so look at the countries that are doing better or worse. But also, of course, next time we're going to talk predominantly about the COP and have a visitor who has a lot of experience, like Monty used to be, a rep of a civil society organization who's been very active, in this case, in climate change with the Sierra Club. Yeah, so should be fun.
Okay, well, thank you again, Angelo, for a wonderful presentation. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to be here today and share with you guys those data, information, and ideas.
Thanks so much. We